Welcome, everybody, to the Grueling Truth Sweet 16 preview show. I'm your host, Mike Goodpaster. Right now, I would like to welcome in my co-host, John Einreinhofer.
Good evening, Mike.
Well, I thought maybe that there was a pause because maybe I said your name wrong again, John.
No, that's perfect. Matter of fact, if everybody was like you, Mike, my life would be a lot easier. But I'll
tell you what, you're the first person that's ever said that to me, John, because usually my wife says the exact opposite.
What I say is everybody can just call me John. It's a lot easier. But you could call me Einreinhofer, too, because you've got it right.
All right. Now, the one thing I noticed is last week we didn't pick too many first-round upsets, which kind of worried me because it seems like there's always a bunch. But this year, the first round seemed to go according to plan.
Yeah, there's been a couple of upsets, but actually, if you look at statistically compared to recent NCAA tournaments, I believe this is the second least amount of upsets in recent years.
Yeah, but we definitely got plenty of upsets in the second round.
Well, they're there, but on the whole, going into the Sweet 16, the year is slipping me. But in recent years, this is the second least amount of upsets overall going into the Sweet 16. Even though, of course, Villanova's gone and Duke's gone, but it's Louisville's gone, but it's still overall on the whole the least amount of surprises.
Well, and I think that everybody realizes now the NCAA screwed up the seeding, and there's no way Minnesota should have been a 5 and Wisconsin an 8.
Yeah, we called Middle Tennessee in our initial preview show for the tournament. We called Middle Tennessee over Minnesota. Of course, a lot of other people were calling that as well. Certainly, that shouldn't be that easy for a team that was seeded where Middle Tennessee State was at 12 to beat Minnesota 5 like that, and that's exactly what happened.
All right, so let's go ahead and break down the regionals for this week. We'll start out with the West region. We'll start off with Gonzaga, and I know a major question all season long was how well Gonzaga would handle the unfamiliar game pressure that it didn't experience during the West Coast Conference season. The answer in Salt Lake City to me, John, was not very well. They looked tight in the first half against South Dakota State, which they only led, I think, by 4 at the half. And I think they got their first lead of the game right towards the end of that half. Then they almost choked away a 22-point lead in the second round against Northwestern. The two problems I saw for the Bulldogs, especially while the Wildcats were making their comeback, the first was their half-court offense was stagnated. It seemed to me like their offense was basically senior point guard Nigel Williams-Goss pounding the ball and trying to play a hero. He shot, I think, 10 for 32 in the 2 wins. Second, and I think this is most important, especially to your West Virginia Mountaineers, Mark Few could not play 7'1", 300-pound center, Prismic Karn, that's a name I can't say. Einreinhofer is easier than that. But Karnowski, down the stretch, because Karnowski was a defensive liability. He is literally, he is a big reason why I picked the Zags on last week's show to go to the Final Four. But if it's hard to leave him in the game against a Northwestern team that maintains a slow tempo, I can't imagine how much of a factor he can be against West Virginia, John.
Well, the one thing that West Virginia, when they go with their press, that gives them an advantage, especially against, I think, a team like Gonzaga, is they force, even though, of course, it's not the way their opponents are designing things to work to break the press, they force people to handle the ball that are not used to handling the ball. That's one of the strengths of the press. Gonzaga likes to play a lot of big men, obviously. That's considered the main strength of their team, I think it's fair to say. And when West Virginia goes to the press and guys like that are forced to touch the ball more in situations they don't want to be touching it, that's where West Virginia has an advantage. And also, West Virginia's played more 1-3-1 down the stretch and has done it effectively to be able to change up, which they hadn't done in past years. And I think that's also a good fit against Gonzaga with those big men.
Yeah, and I know at some point, I know I'm guilty of this. When we talk about West Virginia, I think now with this team, maybe not in the past, but with this team and maybe the 2010 team, we need to talk more than just about the vaunted full-court press. And the wins over a good Bucknell team in Notre Dame, the Mountaineers scored 31 combined points off of turnovers. Their opponents only scored 26. So the press is not the only reason they won. West Virginia won because it was efficient in its half-court offense, which hasn't always been the case with past Mountaineer teams, but they shot 46% against Bucknell. They shot 50% against Notre Dame. They've made a combined 52% from three. And more importantly, the one thing that I think is, really hurt West Virginia in the past was the free throw line. They shot 76% in 55 attempts in those two games. This West Virginia team, is functioning at an extremely high level offensively, John.
Mike, I think your analysis is exactly correct, and you've got it right. I saw flashes against Bucknell, and then I saw everything I needed to see against Notre Dame, having followed the West Virginia team closely, of course, that they're back to where they were in the season when you were looking at this as one of Huggins' best offensive teams, certainly the best since 2010. Now it's going inside, outside, the three-point line. The free throw shooting is better than it has been. If that continues, that's critical. They're healthier than they were at the end of the season, where they didn't have some major injuries, but they did have Issa Ahmad missing time, and some other guys were banged up. I think that having that time off before the tournament really helped them. And I think that now they're playing like they were at their best. And not to get too far ahead of myself, but what interests me about that is now that Kansas looked very good against Michigan State, and that maybe they're going to live up to their expectations. If it ever comes all the way down to it in the end, the Mountaineers, I think, have Kansas's number because they beat them in Morgantown. Now, they've done that for the past 3 seasons, but they had them beat in Allen Fieldhouse, blew it in the last 2 minutes, and lost in overtime. But I think when a neutral floor game, I think the Mountaineers might very well have Kansas's number. But not to get too far ahead, but I think as we get into the Sweet 16, things have certainly played out for West Virginia the way they would want them to play out in terms of just how they're taking care of business themselves.
All right, so we look at the matchup, Gonzaga, West Virginia. Who do you like?
I like West Virginia in that one, and this is I'm not a homer type of a analyst where even if I follow a team regularly like I do the Mountaineers, if they don't have it, I'm not going to pick them. But I like them at the beginning of the tournament to get to the Elite Eight, and they had to get by Gonzaga to do that. And I'm going to take them in this one. They're a 3-point underdog. But one thing, as we just discussed, Mike, about when analyzing the Mountaineers, I like to see where the odds makers have the total points in the game projected, because if they think that West Virginia is going to play offense, I feel like West Virginia is going to be in good shape, and it's 148.5. So I think that they think West Virginia's scoring is going to continue. And I think you made a good point about Gonzaga with the first games in their first 2 rounds. They were generally considered to be the weakest number 1 seed, which I agreed with. Then when you play that virtual bye, as they're correctly calling it, when you're a 1, you play the 16th seed, in this case South Dakota State. That's not a test, and they're coming out of the West Coast Conference. You play a Northwestern team that literally has been in the tournament for the first time in program history, and you let them close down the stretch. How tested are they coming in at this point compared to a team that's played in the Big 12 like West Virginia? Now, I'd be the first to agree that the Big 12 has disappointed when they've been touted in recent years as potentially being the best conference in the country. But now through the first 2 rounds with Baylor, West Virginia, and Kansas left, I think we see signs that they're not a disappointment. And in the Big 12, you were tested virtually every game, week after week. A lot of close games for West Virginia this year, a lot of overtime games. And I think when now you get into this type of a test now, the one negative for West Virginia is not good. They were beaten by them in Morgantown a few years back, and they were crushed by them in the tournament also a few years back. But I think that's going to be ancient history, and West Virginia is going to pull the minor upset, and they are going to be that dangerous team that a lot of people thought they might be until they soured on them just a bit down the stretch in the Big 12 tournament, even though they did reach the title game.
Yeah, I believe this game's pretty much a toss-up. And like I said, if Gonzaga is not able to play their big 7-footer in the second half or in the last 10 minutes because of his lack of being able to play defense, I mean, I think it's going to be a rough road for him. I'm going to go with West Virginia also. And I will say this, which got to surprise you because they picked Gonzaga in the Final Four last week.
It does surprise me, Mike. It does.
I just think that the way they looked in the second-round game, the first-round game, I kind of figured they wouldn't look that great against South Dakota State. I mean, let's face it, they're probably not taking them real seriously. South Dakota State was a better team than what people thought, I think. But I just don't see it here. The one good thing for Gonzaga is this is a week where they can prove themselves. Because what you've got is you've got probably the three best conferences left in this tournament. The three best conferences this year, the way it looks now, was the Big East, the Pac-12, and the Big 12, and they're going to have to go through two of those teams. So I think this is a great opportunity for Gonzaga to prove that they are that good, though.
I agree, and I think one thing that this is where West Virginia's depth is going to help them a little bit. Of course, Gonzaga's just a little bit bigger, but Huggins plays so many guys, and he uses Elijah Macon. He uses Brandon Watkins, who doesn't get as many minutes, but is kind of more of a defensive specialist type big man. And they've got the under the radar freshman Sags Kanate, who's a defensive beast already, and he can keep those guys, three guys out there, have them take fouls, work those big guys, and also with that depth where he works the press. And I think that will cause Gonzaga's big man game enough trouble that the Mountaineers are going to come out on top on this one.
All right, well, we agree on that. So we will go to the second game in the Western region, which is the Xavier Musketeers against the Arizona Wildcats. To me, setting aside who should be the National Coach of the Year, I think there is no doubt the coach of this tournament so far has to be Xavier's Chris Mack. His team put on an absolute clinic, basically eviscerated a more talented Florida State team. Remember, after the Musketeers lost their starting point guard, Edmund Summer, to a season-ending knee injury. They dropped 6 games in a row. They needed to win over Butler just to even make the NCAA tournament. And plus, during that losing streak, you had Trevon Blewett, who's played probably better than anybody in this tournament so far. I think 50 points, 10 rebounds, and 2 wins. And it's taken some time for them to get it back because Blewett had an ankle injury during the 6-game losing streak. I think at the end of the season, their last 8 games, their only 2 wins were against DePaul, and Ray Meyer's not there anymore, so that's not impressive. So
there hasn't been a DePaul win in the Big East hasn't been impressive for a long, long time.
No. So, I think that Xavier's various defense, including a heavy reliance on the zone, give the Musketeers a chance to confuse more talented opponents, which is what it did against Florida State. Plus, they fight through adversity. Their team's toughness. This was a team that I'm a Xavier fan, and I watched them play the University of Cincinnati. Blewett scores 40. They somehow lose the game because they got out-rebounded. It seemed like 78-5. And I know Chris Mack went off on them. The team looked dead in the water. Then after that, they lose 6 games in a row on top of that. And I know that Chris Mack's one of the candidates they're talking about for the IU job. Why you want to go to Indiana University? Xavier's a better job. They've been in a tournament 11 of 12 years. He's been to the Sweet 16 4 times, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years. So I don't know why you'd want to go to IU in that mess.
That little thing called money, Mike. That little thing called money.
Yeah, but also, he can stay at Xavier for another 10 years, maybe win a national championship, and they'll build a monument or a statue to him. So it's not going to happen at IU because they had Bobby Knight and Branch McCracken before that. But they take on Arizona. Arizona, to me, is a really good team, but they're a weird one. They've got great athleticism and size, but they don't have a traditional point guard, which I think could cause them trouble against Xavier. And a lot of times I just wonder if former Xavier coach Sean Miller, who got out of there and Chris Mack took his spot, he's so hyper-intense that I think sometimes in March he renders his teams tight. And the point guard issue means the Cats depend quite heavily on one-on-one isolation plays. And my favorite stat from Saturday night's game was that Purdue power forward Caleb Swanigan had 7 assists, while Arizona had 4 as a team. So I think that could come back to bite the Wildcats when they play a better defensive team. What's your take on this game? What's your pick, John?
Yeah, at the outset of the tournament, Arizona was one of my Final Four picks. I don't see any reason to get off them now. Miller's been getting him to the Elite Eight even consistently. I got to say Xavier did surprise me. A double-digit seed in 11, beat Maryland by double digits, crushed Florida State. Two very impressive victories in the first two rounds. Great run, and that's what gets your coach talked about for the Indiana job, which we have seen all week now. But I think the Cinderella run for Xavier runs out against Arizona here. I think Arizona's just too strong. This is one of those teams that looks to me to be their year. 32-4. They didn't blow out. They didn't blow out St. Mary's, but St. Mary's not a bad team.
Remember this though, Gonzaga put 3 double-digit losses on St. Mary's.
That's the thing. 69-60 Arizona beat them. Not a huge win, but still not a bad team. I don't think anything cause for alarm. Of course, as we know, there can be upsets, but it's always good to take a look at how things handicap going in. Arizona's 7.5-point favorite over Xavier here. Just can't go against the Wildcats here. No reason for me personally to change a Final Four pick here. I think Xavier's Cinderella story is going to run out here against Arizona.
Well, I'm about to just not have you on the show anymore, then, John.
You got to be happy with those first two. You got to be happy with
this is what I think. I think Xavier wins this game, and I think the reason they win this game is Arizona doesn't have a point guard, and I don't take. It's really hard to win an NCAA basketball championship without a true point guard. And the big question to me is, can Arizona make enough mid-range jump shots to force Xavier out of the zone? And I don't think they're going to be able to. I think Xavier's going to pull the upset here. Now, that brings us to the Elite Eight game, which for me is Xavier against West Virginia. And to prove I'm not a homer, I think West Virginia beats them, and I think West Virginia's going to the Final Four, John.
Now, I originally did project it to be Arizona taking on West Virginia in the Elite Eight, but even being having a lot of belief in West Virginia, I originally thought that Arizona would be too much. I am going to hedge a little bit, though, now in your direction that I think West Virginia, the way I see them playing now, I think they can beat Arizona. I think it's within reach.
And I'll tell you this, John. I believe this. I think West Virginia will not have a problem with Arizona. Arizona doesn't have a point guard. I mean, you're playing against a team that's known as Press Virginia and a team that can now shoot the ball. I think a worse matchup for West Virginia is Xavier because you've got a point guard. You got Trevon Blewett who can go off at any time. And I think Chris Mack's a better coach than Sean Miller. And I've seen them both coach. I'm a Xavier fan. So I watched that. I think in the long run, I think you're better off playing Arizona because I think they're going to be tight if they get to an Elite Eight. I don't think they've got a point guard, which makes it really hard to break the pressure. And I think West Virginia handles Arizona by 10 points.
Well, one good sign for West Virginia was in their victory over Notre Dame. Notre Dame, a team throughout the season that did not turn the ball over, and West Virginia beat them by 12 points.
Yeah, and Notre Dame has 2 good guards.
Right. That's one thing that was considered to be even for me. I did look at that as potentially, except for the Arizona game, as West Virginia's worst matchup with who they'd potentially have to take on to get to the Final Four. So they took care of one of those there in Notre Dame in impressive fashion. I think now I feel better about their chances of beating Arizona than I did at the outset of the tournament when I projected that to be the matchup in the Elite Eight. But I would still give a slight edge to Arizona at this point. But I feel better about the Mountaineers' chances in that one than I did just when we were sitting here at the outset of the tournament.
All right, so we got West Virginia. Both of us got West Virginia coming out the West. I just got them beating Xavier. You got them beating Arizona, correct?
I think Arizona and West Virginia is a toss-up. If I got to make a call, I would have to say that the way West Virginia is playing now, I picked Arizona at the outset of the tournament, but I feel that I can go with West Virginia at this point.
All right. Now
that's
we will
go. That's
go.
A tough one. That's a tough one for me.
Yeah, now we'll go to the East, which everybody had penciled in Duke Villanova in the Elite Eight, and I think we both did too. Not real sure, but I think we did.
I can't have amnesia. I thought that Villanova was going to repeat and go all the way, and they're gone already.
Yeah, and I mean,
outside of them in Louisville, I feel good about my picks, but of course those are two big fall paws there. But I think everything else I feel pretty good about, but just Villanova, I thought that they'd shown enough during the year, but they are missing some people from last year, and I don't know if you want to look at it as that caught up with them at this point, but of course they're gone already. And Louisville also, I liked Michigan a lot, but I thought they would not be able to get past Louisville, and they were able to get past Louisville.
All right, so in the East, we've got South Carolina against Baylor. As we look at South Carolina and Baylor, the one thing I love about this is I hear all this Malik Monk crap, but the best player in the SEC plays for South Carolina. His name's Sindarius Thornwell. Most people watching had never heard of him. He was hurt for a lot of the season, where most of South Carolina's losses came were when he was hurt. He's the best two-way player in college basketball, I think. And he turned in an unbelievable performance against Duke, scoring 24 points, 6 rebounds, 5 assists. It's pretty amazing that this program that had not won a tournament game in 44 years and now is going to its first ever Sweet 16. I think that Coach Frank Martin needs a lot of credit for this, and I think South Carolina is going to be a hard out for anybody.
Yeah, well, I think that they're going to be tough. I think all of a sudden, and you and I have discussed them before. I see the writing on the wall now for a re-examination of the Bob Huggins legacy. You've got a Huggins disciple in Frank Martin bringing South Carolina this far. You've got Brad Underwood, who was just at Oklahoma State and just took the Illinois job, did a good job with Oklahoma State this year. And you've got Bob Huggins himself, that we both think that he's got a Final Four team this year. It'll be his second one since 2010. So I think the Bob Huggins legacy is suddenly looking a little bit fresher.
Yeah, but he's still Bob Huggins. We'll see what happens. But you have South Carolina's playing Baylor. I don't think anybody saw South Carolina-Baylor being a Sweet 16 game, John.
No, seeing discussions of the games in the Sweet 16, this one is generally regarded as the least attractive, despite South Carolina.
I think it's a great matchup because as of January 1st, I thought Baylor was the best team in the country. And then they went through a swoon and went like 6 and 7 at the end of the season. I still worry about Baylor's guard play, but this team knows where the bread is buttered, and that's by scoring, rebounding in the post. They outscored New Mexico State in the paint by 22, USC by 8. That will be a lot harder, I think, against the Gamecocks in the Sweet 16. And you can guarantee South Carolina will defend Baylor's guards like they haven't seen all season. But for the first week anyways, Baylor looks like they're more back to the way they looked earlier this season.
I agree with you. I like Baylor, and I think, again, I agree with your analysis there. This Baylor team can really hit the boards. They played WVU last week of the regular season in Waco, and it's very rare with a Huggins WVU team that Baylor out-rebounded them by like 20 in that game when they pulled away in the second half for the victory. I was very impressed by that. I think that they'll have too much for South Carolina and Frank Martin in this one. Baylor, 3.5-point favorite in that. Little bit lower on the over/under on that one at 137.5. So that one's going to be viewed. That one's being viewed by Vegas as a little bit more of a defensive struggle. Yeah,
I'm going to go with Baylor in this game. I do think it'll be a close game.
Yeah, I think that's a tight one. I don't look at that as necessarily an easy pick either. I agree with you. South Carolina, of course. Well, Vegas was picking Duke. Duke was 5-1. They were the favorite to win the tournament at the start of the tournament, even though they were number 2 seed. But coming off the ACC title, and we saw the impressive victory by Frank Martin in South Carolina, a team with no tournament history, ended it for Duke last night, and so they're really, there's no doubt they're playing well. But I agree with you. I think the Baylor team starting to show what they showed earlier in the season, and this team can really hit the boards. So I like them over South Carolina.
All right, that brings us to another team similar to Baylor. Wisconsin looked like one of the top 10 teams in the country for most of the year. Then they lose 5 out of 7. They hadn't notched any marquee wins since before that stretch. But looking back, it's obvious to me that the skid was caused by one thing and one thing only, and that would be Bronson Koening's calf injury. If you recall, that injury kept Koenig, however the hell you say his name, out of a loss at Michigan on February the 16th, and it caused him to shoot poorly while he was still recovering. That was problematic because, A, Koenig is Wisconsin's only dependable three-point shooter, and B, the Badgers need those threes to go down in order to make defenses pay for double-teaming Ethan Happ. So in Buffalo, I think we saw what Wisconsin can do when everybody is healthy and on their game. Koenig, I think, in 2 games scored 45 points, made 11 out of 23 threes over Virginia Tech and Villanova. And the Villanova win is a huge win because I think everybody coming in thought they were the number 1 team in the country. So, yeah, I think Wisconsin's extremely dangerous here too.
Yeah, I like Wisconsin over Florida. As you said, Wisconsin was not playing well down the stretch in the regular season, but they beat the team I thought was going to win the tournament in Villanova, the defending national champions. Florida just annihilated Virginia. I thought Virginia had some struggles in the second half of the season, but I still thought they had a good team, and Florida held them to 39 points. This one also expected to be a more of a defensive struggle at an over-under of 131.5. Florida 2-point favorite. I like Wisconsin to pull the minor upset in this one, but this is also. I see this as a tight game though as well.
Yeah, I do too. I mean, in Florida, they lost. Their center John Egbunu to a ACL tear. Now, if you look at them, their leading scorer, Kevon Allen, shot a combined 3 for 21 from the floor during the first week of the NCAA tournament. But Florida overcomes that with tenacious defense. But I just think Wisconsin's got too much talent for them. So I think that we are both looking at Wisconsin and Baylor. Who do you like there to go to the Final Four?
I've got to go with Baylor there. I think that, again, that's a very, very tight one, but I have not felt that way in recent years. But this looks like the year that the Big 12 might live up to expectations. And as you said, Baylor very briefly ranked number 1 before WVU beat them earlier in the season, but was a team in the top 10 or right on the edge of the top 10 all season. Of course, Wisconsin beat Villanova. Tough matchup there, but I got to go with Baylor. I think that the Big 12 very competitive this year, even though people talk, Kansas won it by 4 games, but still overall very competitive year in the Big 12, and it looks like this might be the year it lives up to expectations, where all that battle testing is going to pay off here in the tournament. So I'm going to go with Baylor.
Yeah, I'm going with Baylor also. As I said, I liked them since the start of the year. I watched them, I think, in 1 week, beat 3 top 10 teams in December. Because I know they dropped Louisville, they beat Butler, they beat Louisville, they beat Xavier. I forget who the third win was against, but they had 3 top 10 wins all in like a 10-day period, and they were playing really well. So I've seen what they can do. They convinced me at that time, but all right, so that will bring us to the Midwest, where there are no Big 12 teams. Well, yes, there are. There's still another Big 12 team. Are you just going to go Big 12 final, 3 out of the Final 4, John?
I am at this point with the way it's played out, because I think my continuing theme is that after what I felt a lot of disappointments in recent years, when the Big 12's reputation, of course, always one of the power conferences since things have reformed, but their basketball reputation going up and up in the regular season, but not correlating with tournament success. It looks to me like this is the year that changes. Kansas really impressively handled Michigan State.
But Michigan State didn't even belong in a tournament, I didn't think, John.
Not one of Izzo's better teams, no doubt about that. But just still, he's had success in the past, except for last year when he got bumped by Middle Tennessee State. But Kansas looked like they were living up to their billing a little bit. They've got Frank Mason, Big 12 Player of the Year. It looks, Purdue's playing well, but the thing that I think really tips it is that that's in Kansas City, and that's like a home. Kansas is one of the toughest teams at home in the country, and now they're dealing with a virtual home game. They're so tough at home normally. I think when you put them in this situation with a virtual home game, that's one of the things that I'm looking at is they're going to be tough to beat in Kansas City.
Yeah. I think Purdue's a good team. I think they've been underrated all year. I think Caleb Swanigan causes a lot of problems for people. I like Kansas in this game also. I think Frank Mason will be too much. Playing in Kansas City, it'll be too much. So I think we both agree there that Kansas will go through to the Elite Eight. Then you've got number 3, Oregon, against number 7, Michigan. And this is one where the higher-seeded team is actually the underdog. The Ducks are getting 1.5 against the Michigan team that is the best story, or one of the best stories in sports so far this year. Oregon flirted with danger against upside-minded Rhode Island, who actually I thought Rhode Island would beat them, but they didn't. I think this is going to be a great game. Michigan's offense is multifaceted. They're operating as smoothly as any team in the tournament. UCLA, including teams like UCLA. Oregon has a 1-2 attack from Dylan Brooks and Tyler Dorsey that is good enough, to vault the Ducks into the Final Four. Derek Walton is trying to pull off his best Kemba Walker impersonation. I can't wait for this game, but I'm going to go with Michigan to go to the Elite Eight.
I like Michigan. I do find it.
And I would like to bring up the fact that I picked Michigan to make the Final Four, actually to play in a national championship game last week.
I like Michigan as well. I'm a big fan of John Beilein's coaching ability, and now seeing him with a big guy, Mo Wagner, that really Beilein's never really had the big guy. He's got his system with ball movement. He's got a lot of great offensive sets and shooting threes, and now you throw a big man into his mix. And of course, Michigan didn't have the greatest of regular seasons, but I'm on the bandwagon. The thing that I find curious that makes me chuckle a bit, though, is when we've reached a point that the power schools are so dominant that we're talking about Michigan like it's some sort of a mid-major Cinderella story.
But I think that's more because of the 11 losses. If you look, Villanova was a Big East team in the original Big East that won a national championship that is considered maybe the biggest Cinderella of all time to win it.
Right, and I agree. And as much of an upset as it was, I thought that was an overrated achievement. They played in the same conference as Georgetown, played them regularly.
Well, in '85, they lost an overtime game at home, and I think they lost by 8 on the road at Georgetown, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. I thought that was a bit of an overrated. I
don't think so, John. That Georgetown team was one of the greatest teams I ever saw. And you also got to remember this. Villanova beat them by 2 points, and they shot 90% in the second half and 72% in the first half.
I do agree it was a great Georgetown team. I've never disputed that. I just think the level of the achievement in the greatest upset
NC State was the bigger upset, I think, of the two.
I felt like that was a bigger upset. Of course, that was when NC State was a great program and the greatest basketball conference, the ACC, which of course disappointment this year, big disappointment, but still generally gets regarded as that. They had a lot of losses that year compared to what they would normally have at that time, even though they made the tournament. But again, as we would both agree, of course, that was a great Houston team. That was also like that Georgetown team. You're talking about a great all-time college basketball team, despite the failure in the final to NCAA.
Well, the Houston team could have been an all-time great team if they would have just won one of those finals.
Yeah.
Because you look at them, you had the Final Four in 82. They lost to Carolina by 5, I think it was, and then they blew the national championship game in 83, and then in 84 they lost to Patrick Ewing and the Hoyas by 9.
Yep, we still do remember the Phi Slamma Jamma today, though.
Oh, you how can you forget the Phi Slamma Jamma, especially the Final Four game against Louisville, where I think every point scored for both teams was a dunk, if I remember right.
that was unforgettable. I could still remember getting excited watching that.
All right, so I assume you're going with Kansas out of this bracket to go to the Final Four, and I'm still going to stick with Michigan.
Yeah, I gotta go with Kansas coming out of this bracket at this point. Being fair, I originally liked Louisville, thought that they, liked the way Michigan was playing and a lot of faith in Beeline, but didn't think they'd be able to get by Louisville, but they got by Louisville. A 2-point victory, of course, went right down to the wire, but Louisville's gone, so I've got to make an adjustment there. Going into the tournament, I thought that I thought the Iowa State team, would be able to get farther, and that they might have had Kansas's number. They beat them at Kansas, but they couldn't get by that Purdue team with Swanigan. Was a little too much for them. So retooling, I've got to go with Kansas.
All right, that brings us to the South bracket, which is my favorite, because these are the two games outside of course, the Xavier game that I'm most looking forward to. We've got North Carolina against Butler, and let's face it, if it wasn't for bad officiating, Arkansas would have beat North Carolina's ass. I mean, North Carolina had a 17-point lead in the first half against Arkansas. Arkansas chipped away, got it back. There were a ton of questionable calls in this game, John.
There were, Mike. And this is why I have a bit of a dilemma, because North Carolina was one of my original Final Four teams, and I've got them, had them going to the Final Four, and they're still left. They're not playing great. Of course, the ACC tournament didn't go well for them, but not to divert, but the way things play out, you start to wonder how much these conference tournaments mean for the major teams. But I still think North Carolina with their talent, Roy Williams. I like a lot of things that this Butler team has done this year. North Carolina is a 7.5-point favorite, but I would consider Butler one of the live underdogs. I can't pick them in this one, but they got 2 victories over Villanova. They've had their downs this year, but they beat a good Middle Tennessee State team to get to this point. I would think that they're not really that little underdog team anymore. You want to think of them that way, but they've moved beyond that point, and I think since they have, I would think they can give North Carolina a better game than the 7.5-point spread would indicate, but I don't think they can get over the top against North Carolina.
Yeah, I think Butler wins this game outright.
So you think they're going to?
I think Butler wins this game. I don't think North Carolina is mentally a very tough team. I mean, they got a ton of talent. Butler is the best college basketball team in the state of Indiana and has been for probably the last 10, 15 years. They play in the Big East. If you look at Butler, I don't know too many teams that have more top 25 wins either. I mean, it seemed like the only games they lost were the teams that weren't that good that they kind of fell asleep on. I mean, Butler used to be the cute, cuddly underdog, as you talked about, but I think they kind of killed that with 2 straight national championship games. I like Butler to win this game. I'm not sold on North Carolina. I haven't been all year. I think Butler pulls the upset here.
I think it doesn't give you the feel of being one of the better North Carolina teams, but I think they'll still have enough to hold off Butler. I got to go with North Carolina there.
Well, if they would ever put them on probation the way they should for all the crazy shit that goes on down there, then we wouldn't even have to worry about this. But that's another show, probably. But not a big Roy Williams fan. That brings us to Kentucky-UCLA, which is, I think, flat out the best matchup. And they played, I don't know if you saw the earlier game during the year when UCLA beat them at Kentucky. They played a great game there. UK did not play well this weekend, I don't think. Northern Kentucky, they beat Northern Kentucky by 9, which is a team that they should have beaten worse. But they did have a win over a really good Wichita State team. But I think UCLA's just got too much talent for them here, John.
Yeah, I like UCLA in this one also. Kentucky, this is not as good of a team as Calipari's had in recent years. Kansas, of course, Kansas very talented, but Kansas beat them at Kentucky. UCLA's been very good all season. Interesting. This one is expected to be up tempo. We got with a 168.5 over under. Virtual toss up. I'm going to go with UCLA though as well. I think that I don't think that this Kentucky team has played that great. Although the SEC is looking a little better in the tournament than we would have expected with Kentucky, South Carolina, Florida. Not many people looked at things that way going in, but I'm still going to go with UCLA.
All right, so that brings your Elite Eight game to North Carolina against UCLA.
Which is a tough call, but I had Carolina for the Final Four going in. It's a tough one, but I think Carolina will get by them. The ACC, of course, has tanked in this tournament. North Carolina, the only team left already, proving that conference was overrated. And North Carolina did not get to the ACC tournament final. But despite those facts, I've got to go with North Carolina there.
All right, I'm going to go with UCLA over Butler, just for the simple fact that Butler, Michigan, Baylor, West Virginia does not sound like a Final Four, John.
I agree. It's got to sometimes. It's got to sound.
But it
good.
would be awesome if it was. But I can tell you this: CBS would hate it.
I got the Blue Bloods on one side with Kansas and North Carolina. But
I do too, kind of. Michigan, UCLA. I mean, you can't get more blue-blooded in college basketball than UCLA.
No, they're definitely one of the Blue Bloods as well.
But all right, so we'll save our Final Four picks for next week. So we'll do a Final Four show, and we'll see how many of our teams are left.
We got to make sure at least if we have another show before we pick them, then we have to have somebody.
Yeah, well, I figured we'll do a show there, and if you want, we can even do a national championship preview tonight before the national championship game.
Yeah, that way we can. That way we can revisit these subjects.
Yeah, we could just keep picking this until we get it right. I mean, if we have to on Tuesday night after the championship game, we can do a show re-picking the game if you want, even if one of us is wrong.
That's how we're going to close it all out.
Yeah, but any final words, John? And we got a West Virginia Sweet 16 show coming up soon, or?
Yeah, we can always we the Mountaineers. This is a big time for the Mountaineers.
Okay, that's all you got. This is a big time for the Mountaineers. I thought you weren't a homer.
Well, I'll try to put it down, but this is a big time for the Mountaineers. I think that they can. Again, we both pick them by Gonzaga, so not too bad of a home. People were down on West Virginia before the tournament, but now the bandwagon has been reboarded.
Don't give me the bandwagon thing. I mean, the West Virginia gave people a lot of doubts the way they played in the Big 12 conference tournament.
Well, that's what it was. Right, that's what it was about. People.
All that was caused by West Virginia themselves. It wasn't because people just doubted it because of Huggins. It still would not surprise me to see them lose just because of Huggins. I think Huggins is a hell of a coach. It seems like, he was in the Cincinnati area forever. I'm a Xavier fan, not a UC fan, but it used to be hilarious how many times they'd be a 1 or 2 seed and get knocked out by the second round.
Yeah, I think that he's not going to talk about that, but I think he's aware of it, and that's why, you know, for somebody like Bob Huggins, this kind of thing's critical. That's why I was saying about the possible groundwork.
Yeah, because he's not going to get too many chances. I mean, isn't he close to 70?
He's in his 60s. Yeah, he's in his mid-60s, and he's not a health nut, as we all know. I don't think I'm saying. Yeah,
I don't think Jägermeister's something you work out with.
Yeah. I don't think I'm saying that anything out of school to say he's not a health nut. But that's what I'm saying here. Now you've got Frank Martin still going. Brad Underwood taking the Illinois job. Huggins still alive in the Sweet 16. Maybe this is going to be one of these stories, you know, as we approach April, that maybe this is going to be the big re-examining of the Bob Huggins legacy, because you know how the media generally will jump on the bandwagon. They have to have a story, and if Huggins
they'll all love
that
him
run,
if he wins a couple more games.
Exactly, if he makes that run.
But if he loses in the Final Four, they're going to get him worse than they've ever got him, probably.
I agree. It's fair or not for Bob Huggins, this is probably a type of situation that he's got to get to the national title.
Yeah, and let's face it, I mean, most of the Huggins stuff is brought on by Huggins.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you know, who else has inflicted the wounds, but he himself over the years. You know, he's at West Virginia, which of course is where he played, which is a good fit for him. But what people forget is before that West Virginia got John Beilein, they tried to get Bob Huggins back, and at that time when he was still at Cincinnati, he wasn't interested in coming back. Matter of fact, he turned down overtures to come back, and then when the wheels came off, he resurrected himself at Kansas State and was able to make the transition back to his alma mater. And what he has proven to be very good at, though, and I think he gets deserved credit here, is that not necessarily in game, but just in terms of practice, preparation, he's shown a surprising ability to make adjustments in terms of what style his team plays with that's been effective. He adopted some of Beilein's style when he had Beilein's guys, and he got to the Final Four. And then things went horribly wrong their first year in the Big 12, and he switched to the Press Virginia, and that resurrected the program. And then recently, you know, he's been running some 1-3-1 zone, and he's got a good offensive team this year. So he's
well, maybe he can be a little like Jim Boeheim, who was considered a choke artist till 2003.
That's right. That Boeheim, good point, Mike. Boeheim had that.
Yeah, because he went 25, 30 years with teams that were seeded in the top three almost every year and never getting it done, but he finally did. But that is not to put John Elway. That's not to put Bob Huggins on the same plane as Jim Boeheim, because Bob Huggins is a lot better coach than Jim Boeheim, in my opinion.
Of course, different sport, but I remember, you know, John Elway was the
Steve Young even.
Yeah, Steve. That's right. Steve Young had that reputation.
And really, Steve Young's might have been tougher to do than Elway's, because Young had to follow Joe Montana.
Right, and I am a person, actually, I like to get analytical enough where, not that it's not about ultimately winning, which of course it is, but with that understood, you know, I think you have to look at the talent of the player or the coach, that just the sole fact of winning a title is overrated in that sense. I personally don't look at, say, a Dan Marino any less, and Bob Huggins is kind of in the basketball coaching version right now. He's in that kind of limbo like we're discussing.
But I look at Dan Marino in a less way, because he had the 85 championship at home against the Patriots, who he'd beaten twice and lost and played terrible. And he had 92 against the Dolphins, who he beat twice at home, and he got blown out, and he played terrible. So, I mean, when you're the number one seed, just like Peyton Manning, how many times was he the number one seed and lost a home playoff game in Indianapolis?
Well, that's the thing. Peyton Manning.
I mean, so you can't give me that, well, he didn't have enough talent, because they had enough talent to be the number one seed that year. But
I think
it is what it is. You got to win in the end. So
yeah, but in the end, we both agree that's certainly what the media and what the fans, what the narrative is going to be, and that's why you see Bob Huggins at his age and And for him, it's getting that in a crunch time where we're going to see, which way this legacy is going to tilt.
Well, it's kind of like if you're a lawyer, John, and you're in a case, and you try the hell out of it. You do a great job at that case, but you lose. Nobody remembers that you did a really good job getting to that point to the end. They just remember that you lost. No,
that is true. That is true. All we talk about is the big verdicts. Litigation, and I'm in litigation, and litigation is a lot like sports. That's one of the reasons I've always liked litigation, because you're right in comparing those principles, because the world of litigation is very much like in athletics where you don't run and jump. It's like
I think in the words of the great auto racer Ricky Bobby, if you ain't first, you're last.
Yeah, there's a lot of you're right to make that comparison to litigation. There's a lot of that in litigation, and there really are probably same thing. Great lawyers who never got that one big verdict.
Yep, not everybody can be Johnny Cochran, I guess.
That's right.
All right, John.
You can make those comparisons.
Yeah, well, we'll go ahead. We'll wrap this up. I appreciate you coming on with me again. Appreciate everybody out there to listen to this show last week, which we actually had a few thousand listens, John, by the time all the numbers were done. So hopefully we did that good tonight. So I want to thank everybody for listening in. And hopefully you can catch us one day next week where we will preview the Final Four. Make sure you go to thegruelingtruth.net. Check out all of our shows, all of our articles. You can follow us on Twitter @GruelingTruth. Find us on Facebook, the Grueling Truth Facebook page. You can go on there, you can follow us so you can hear all the shows, read all the articles. And make sure you catch us on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, anywhere you find sports podcasts, you'll find the Grueling Truth. So for John Einreinhofer, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to the Grueling Truth, where the legends